Hello everybody, it's Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and this is episode 28 of Rocket Lasso Live, the show where I answer questions from Twitch and from YouTube, just from the chat, not knowing what's coming up about usually Cinema 4D, and we just try and figure out live as we go. It's a slightly unusual episode because SIGGRAPH is going on right now and C4D Live was going, so this show is starting more than almost 3.5 hours late than as compared to usual, but we already have links coming in from people, so we can begin answering those questions. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out, and let's get the proper screen up here and start clicking around on some questions. Let's see, we got an Instagram link here from Magica. Let's see what we got. Hopefully no audio. That's always fighting. Let's see. All right, I'm pulling this over. It looks like we've got a model of a face, very sliced up. This is from Tavo Studio for the Off Festival. Or maybe it's not for the Off Festival. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. But yeah, it was Identity for Digital Thinkers Conference. So yeah, we've got a whole series of slices here going through a model. There's a little bit of extra additional detail on top of the slices that we're seeing. So let's see, we've tackled similar ideas, but let's see how quickly we can do this and see if there's any additional information to gather, especially that we're seeing these kind of gaps in the model. So it's kind of a new element. See how well we can make this work and how parametric we can make it. So very cool animation, nice colors, but here we are, Cinema 4D S22. We need some sort of model to base it off of. I'm going to jump into the content browser and see if we have any basic models from Maxon, so that everybody would be on the same one. Although I think I don't have the sculpt models. Or maybe I do. Default presets. Every time I try and find these, I'm always like, oh, I've lost the defaults. Now, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Well, I wanted to go a little deeper with something like the dog model or something. But since those are not easily popping up for us, I'm fine starting with something extra basic. Sphere is too boring. Not that this is that much more exciting, but we'll have a slightly more complicated dodecahedron type shape here. And the thought is, let's make this into a volume using the volume builder. Hold down Alt as I put that into a volume mesher. This can be, here's a little tip. If this little line, which is very sensitive and hard to grab, but if it's covering up your object, you can just double click it and it's going to jump to match the longest title on any of the different objects you have. Throwing this into the volume builder, we're going to see it get converted into a nice blob for us. The lower poly this is, the better. So I'm going to keep it fairly low poly. Now I want this to look a little more complex. So the way I will do that is, I think, just throw in a field using can you do a plain? Actually, no, we put the fields in directly. I thought it had to be an effector, but yeah. Using a random field, that can become also an object. And immediately you see a bunch of big blobby stuff filling in the space. Now, this random field is going to fill in a default scale. We can feed in lots of different scales here. Specifically here, it's set to 200 by 200. But even better, we can say, actually, look at the objects that are below. And now it's going to be limited to that shape. It's currently a union between these two objects. But I'm going to say, I want to see the intersection. Oh, is that intersect? Maybe A subtract B? I'm not sure yet. We'll have to see what the end result ends up being on that. But the noise right now is probably way too small. So by increasing the noise scale, we can see a little bit more of a shape pop in. And now we can see one shape subtracting from the other one. If we set to intersect, then it is working properly. We just need the noise to be large enough that could actually be caught. Now, I think, let's lower the voxel size, which will increase our resolution. And any changes we make to this noise will be represented here in our view. So we start getting some nice looking blobs. We can stretch it vertically if we are so inclined. We could go really vertical and really horizontal, and it's going to start creating a series of slices on particular planes. So you can see it feels more like slices are happening. If we do really large numbers in here, I think it's going to start feeling very flat with these very more like sliver shapes chopping through. The more I shrink this, the more we'll need additional resolution. So just for fun, I'll lower this. You can see I'm doing slices like that. I'm not quite sure of, that's where they're intersecting, but the platonic is not filling in the overall shape. It's just doing this outer mesh. It's always been something I've been a little lost on. Like, how do I get that entire volume filled up? Maybe it's the fog mode. Yep, that seemed to be it. So setting this to fog mode, now we're getting the entire volume, and these should be sealed in shapes. So now it's just stylistically deciding what we want this to look like. Personally, I think these can go back to being a very reasonable size. Crank up the overall scale, 333, and we get some nice little blobs intersecting, and that's actually working fairly well. Now, just because we're on a live stream, we want this to calculate quickly. I'm going to make this chunkier just so that we get quicker calculations. I guess that's probably fine at 5. So that's that final geometry. I don't like seeing this box, thus turning off the random field. We'll hide that. It's a little bit chunky because of how few polygons we throw at this thing. But if I were to put a smoothing deformer in addition to these, it's going to smooth everything out, which just makes it look way better overall. We can do as many smoothing iterations as we want and pull this back, add more iterations. It's going to smooth it more and more and more. So just enough to round those shapes out, I think, is going to give us a pretty good solution there. Saving the scene file before we do the more dangerous part. Let's go to episode 28, scene files, and save this as 1 slices. This is important to note that if you are supporting on Patreon, you get access to these scene files. When I post the episode at the end of the week, then you get these scene files at the same time for the people who like to reverse engineer things like I do. So with this being a more complicated final shape, and I'm pretty sure we could even animate this pretty well. If we gave this some animation speed of, say, 55, hitting play, we can see that would actually update and play through. The hopeful goal here is if we hit play that this will blob around. I don't imagine it's going to calculate terribly fast, but we'll see what we end up with. So that's looking nice. Saving that, we now have this final mesh. We want to slice this up a bunch. To do that, we're going to use the wonderful Voronoi fracture. Throwing in our volume mesher into the fracture, it's going to begin to break it up into random parts. In this case, it's got random sources to generate different points, and that's where it gets subdivided. If we delete those points, then it's one big giant chunk. Actually, something that's pretty cool is that would actually separate each individual part. Now, this is currently one segment, only one mesh, and it's all touching. But if they are separate ones, it would explode those out in separate pieces. Now, I want to subdivide this in a very specific way. As in the reference, we could see it was a series of slices traveling through it. We can control slices in a very specific way very easily using the matrix object. The matrix object is essentially a bunch of empty clones. It's just the positional information. So X, Y, and Z, we want to keep the X. So this can go down to 1. We just get one line, slice, 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 slice. Now, of course, the Voronoi fracture is trying to find the nearest point to it. So if we were to feed this in, it's going to subdivide everything in this pretty interesting, perfectly striped way, because everything in this slice is closest to that one particular matrix clone. And this piece is closest to that one. So this is a very clean way of getting that to update. Now, the fewer chunks, the fewer slices we feed at this, the quicker I think everything will calculate. So I'll put a little extra space in between these, and we still get a decent number of slices, enough to show this off. In the fracture, if we were so inclined, I don't know that we specifically are, but if we tell this to, let's see, we can do some offset fragments, and that should put a gap in between them so we can visibly see a gap. And honestly, this could be a really good end result for this. If we do a large enough gap and these are all evenly subdivided, this gives us those slices. I actually thought we were going to convert this to a spline, but now I think about it, I don't think there's any reason not to essentially leave it like this. Whatever it's getting fed in, that is going to be the end result. Turning on a little bit of SSAO will give us that separation in between. And we even start out with these nice random pastel colors, which look pretty good. So hide the matrix object from the viewport. And let's see what kind of playback we get. Not bad. The colors are going to be jumping all over the place, so that's going to distract us. So I will turn off colorized fragments. That's as they're getting created and destroyed each frame. But now you can see we have we could feed any model in here, any type of noise to intersect that noise, intersect the model. And then based on the end results of that, we can get these flat cutouts and layer them up as much as we want and make them as thick as we want with a very simple, clean hierarchy here. So this is actually pretty cool. So yeah, I'm actually pleased with how smooth this overall shape is. Oops, sorry, too thick on that one. And of course, make them bigger and chunkier there, or as many subdivisions and offset fragments as we want to. And these are also individual pieces now. So I don't think this really adds to this effect. But if we wanted to, I believe we could also throw in, say, a random effector here. I guess it'll jump around a lot as they're being created, but those are being pushed off randomly. It'd probably be a better idea to feed them in. They'd still be changing as these pieces are like getting created and then ceasing to exist. So we could do certain things in there, but they're going to jump around like that because every refresh is a completely new model, unrelated to the previous one. And I mean, all the tricks that we just talked about, we could add more of these in. Just go easy on the thickness of these offsets, and we could cut this up more times. And it's actually still running quite well, so I like that a lot. And yeah, that should pretty much do it. If we did want to, let's just spend a second to talk about colorizing these things. And if anybody has any questions specifically about this, then let me know. Otherwise, start getting those next questions together. But I just want to talk about, let's say we wanted every slice to get a particular color and to maintain that color. And I'm not even sure if I have a good idea for this. But the main thing is at different given points, there might be like two separate pieces that aren't touching, which means they get different colors. So the thought here is, what if we fed in, let's say, a plane effector, and instead of this controlling the position, we allow it to control the color mode, field color. So now it cares about the fields. Now feeding in the linear field, that's going to give us a transition on X. I want it to be a transition on Z. And now you can see that each one of these is transitioning through based on the color remap. Currently, it's just a color going from nothing, it's not applied, all the way up to full power. However, if I change this to a gradient, we should have complete control over exactly what this transition would be. And we could make as many individual slices as we want to and create every color that we'd like to see as well. And yeah, start making cool shapes like that. And of course, each one of these is colorized. And because of the way they're sliced, they're going to fully be that color all the way through. And we just end up with a really nice looking end result there. I'm actually quite pleased with that for being something relatively simple and straightforward. I'm actually digging that a bunch. I'll just save that because it's so clean. We didn't make anything editable. And just as a final note, we can throw in any model that we wanted here. So a simple thing to do would be creating a little bit of text, choose whatever we want to, C4D. It'd probably be nice to get some thicker letters in here. So not a great one to go to, but impact will work. T for scale, maybe even make those a little bit thicker. So now that becomes the model. Swapping that out for the platonic shape that we had, turn it off. That should get fed in, and that is actually what is going to get blobbed and shaped together with any luck. It might be a little too detailed for what we're doing with the volume, so let me try lowering that down. Yeah, so that gets more detailed, and then make sure that the order is proper here. So that's seeing the shape underneath, and I want to see where this is. I guess it automatically overrides it. So yeah, there's the text updated. Just make sure that my linear field, scale that down so it's matching our overall shape. Get whatever colors we want from that. If we hit play, we now have the same thing transferred to text, and we just have complete control over that. It looks really, I don't know, it's really kind of tasty looking at. If it starts looking delicious, I feel like it's good motion graphics. Let's see, I'll save this as another version because why not? And let's see what the next question is. Let's see. No questions coming in on YouTube, but we have more on Twitch. So jumping to Twitch. Nelson, I'm intimidated by the shoe cloth question, so I'm going to skip that one for now. Tom, what do you got? You're trying to figure out a good way to have a dynamic object be caught by a tractor beam. Okay, I'm intrigued. Imagine a dynamic ball being thrown in the air and frozen in a UFO tractor beam halfway up. And if the UFO moves, then the ball's motion is locked with the UFO while staying dynamic. Yeah, tried the parent constraint, but wanted to know if there's a way to do it with fields or something. That is an excellent question. So let's see what we've got along those lines. So like you're saying, yeah, you want to throw a ball into the air. Let's make it a little more visually interesting by grabbing a Cinema 4D preset object. We should be able to grab a sports item, and let's have it be a baseball. Now, in spite of this baseball being a fairly high poly, this actually, pretty crazy high poly, we can instantly make this dynamic and run really quickly by adding a simulation rigid body tag, telling it to be a single, actually it defaults, it applies the tag to children, but I want it to be a compound collision shape. And I want the shape to be ellipsoid. So it's going to be treated as kind of the spherical shape no matter what. So the hope is that in spite of all this extra geometry, if I were to drop this on the ground, it should calculate very quickly and very accurately. So you see our FPS down here is very, very fast. So with that working well, how would I go about throwing and catching this? One immediate thought would be, let's initialize this by having some velocity. It's actually probably quite small. Yeah, you see it's really tiny. I could scale down the Cinema 4D dynamics, but in general, if you're leaving all the settings default, Cinema 4D likes objects to be at a particular scale, like they're optimized for about a default cube, a default sphere. So I'm gonna hit T for scale and scale up this baseball until it's a little bit bigger, kind of in the ballpark of the cube, no pun intended. So with this being a little larger, it's just going to behave a little bit more in the default way Cinema expects. So with that in mind, I want it to have a initial velocity. So under dynamics, say custom initial velocity, give it some speed. I want it to go up. So positive on Y. I'm not sure what's a good speed. 555 tends to be pretty good. And let's say positive Z. I'm sorry, positive X. So we'll say 555 on X and see what that does. Okay, not very much. I want, let's see, quite a bit more. So I'll add some, times 5-esque power on there. And that should be enough to give that a good toss. So there we go. That's being flung through the air. And it's just going to travel in a big arc, and gravity will eventually take over and it will fall. So with that in mind, let's give ourselves some more frames and figure out exactly what we want this to do. Now, we want it to be dynamic and interact with things potentially. I'm not sure what we want it to bump into, but it could be getting dragged through a tractor beam and bouncing off trees and whatnot. It's making me think of the Pixar short where the farmer, I forget what it's called, Lifted. The short's called Lifted, where he's getting abducted and bouncing all over the house. In any case, we want it to remain dynamic as it's pulled. Now, as you mentioned, you can use the good old... under force, we can use the follow position. Now, that's in contradiction to what we just did right now. So if I give it a really strong follow position, even though we said to be flung, you see it's actually not going to move that much. If I put just way down to like 1, I think it'll get flung a little bit, but now you see it's trying to kind of hover around the original area that it was told to, where it was created at. Now, we could keyframe that and transition from one spot to another and kind of increase the follow position when it just happens to be near that area. And I've done that type of animation before. In fact, that's what I did for the Dumb and Dumber 2 logo, where I just made sure at a particular moment that where I wanted it to go was where it happened to be dynamically, and then I keyframed up the position strength. And that might end up being how we go here. But now that we do have field forces, let's see if we can get anything from that. Now, I'll keep it all pretty straightforward. And since we're doing a shorter show today, I want to cover as many, or keep these shorter if possible. Here's a thought. We need to add some forces in here, specifically a simulate forces, field forces. It's going to be really tiny as far as their cross-cut here. So I'm not going to worry too much about making that visible. In fact, I will hide it, so we don't have to worry about seeing anything visibly. Now we can put in different field forces. Specifically, I think we should just do a big old spherical field and make it pretty large. And yeah, I'm actually going to go pretty overboard here and make that pretty large. Now, I'm not sure where the sphere ends up. Let's give it a good chance to, actually, I aimed pretty well there. So right as it's kind of hitting its arc, its peak right there, I'm going to say, okay, that's when I want this to be at its strongest. So we've sort of, even though it is dynamic, we know where it's ending up. Now, the field force has this spherical field fed in, and that means everything is either getting repulsed, attracted, or pushed away from this particular spot. This field force currently is got its strength down at 5, and this correlates perfectly with gravity, and default cinema gravity is 40. So if we say 40, this should be the same power as gravity. So this should be a good way of, it's not actually not that strong, but is it going to be, it's hard to tell. I'm going to make it like crazy strong, 400, and we'll see if this accelerates in or gets pushed away. It seems to be getting pushed away. This is not currently attracting the object, it's pushing it away. So in the spherical field, the direction needs to be inverted. So we could do a negative scale or turn off invert direction. And now it should be an attractor. So now as this gets pulled in, hopefully, well, it's not pulling as much as I would hope it would. And it is saying add to velocity. Let me think. Well, let's turn on the display box and actually make sure that this is being fed in. I did the thing I do accidentally. I always go to look to it. I accidentally fed the spherical field into the fall off tab. And it's great that we have a fall off tab, but we actually need this in the object tab, not the fall off tab. So I'll drag it into the opposite one and delete the one from fall off. This strength should be crazy strong now, and it's probably gonna be absurd. Actually, it's still not anywhere near as strong as I was expecting it to be. There's no fall off. The strength is crazy high. This is dynamic, and it should automatically see any force that we feed into it. And it is getting into that spherical field right now. So that's very, very, very strong. Now, it's not, shouldn't be considering mass because that's turned off. I'm going to keep on. What did I do wrong here? Yeah, exactly. Not a very attractive sphere. Let me think. This is a really simple setup, so I'm curious what the problem is. I mean, we can just keep on going absurdly strong on the strength here, but I'm thinking that it must be outside of this because it's just not applying. That's velocity. That's the spherical scale. Density. Let's see. Yeah, I'm a little stumped. Well, apologies for whatever the problem there is. I will try again quickly. I might have messed something up in some setting somewhere. I blame, this one's on me. So let's feed in. Let's keep it real simple. I'll make a spherical field there. Crank up the size, and you can immediately see it getting represented here. So it should be doing something. So if we put the spherical field above, I think we should very clearly see it get attracted towards the center. And it did automatically get fed into the proper object tab. So let's hit play and see. Yep. Okay. Now it's immediately, you saw immediately it's having a huge effect on it. So go figure. I'm not entirely sure what I did wrong, but let's move that out of that field and see where that ends up arcing right around there. And let's see how well we can get this thing to be attracted to this shape. Now, I have a feeling we're going to want this to be pretty large in order to properly catch it, but I'm not sure. So it's going to get pulled in. Now, here's going to be one of the problems is as it gets pulled in, it's going to have a attraction to the center point. So it's going to accelerate in, and as soon as it accelerates in, it's going to kind of fling itself out. So this added energy is going to make it behave a little bit oddly. So in this particular case, what I'm thinking, well, there's two things. One, we could add friction in. There's a danger with the friction though, because if we add an overall friction, which is a really good idea, we could also turn on direction though. Or set, I don't know. I just had a completely unrelated idea. Oh, that worked well. Yeah, I just changed it to change direction, which is now constantly applying, saying, hey, you have to go towards the center here no matter what. You don't have a choice in it. So change direction has nothing to do with speed. It's taking the existing speed and dragging it in there. Now we could add in a friction, as I was saying, and the friction would be draining energy out from the entire system. The worry with a friction, and you'll see that I'll actually calm it down slowly in the center. The problem with a friction is it's going to cause that ball to slow down almost immediately. Now we do have the option of giving the friction the same spherical fall off and hitting play. And we'll let that get pulled in. And the friction doesn't really get applied until it's around that time. Now you see, it's actually the friction was really powerful in this area. So I wonder if we lower it, if we can kind of, the friction's getting pulled way down. I'm a little worried that the friction's too strong to allow the ball to get attracted to that shape because we're constantly losing speed. So yeah, it's kind of a push and pull on there. Now, even though I love fields and they're amazing, this actually, I'm starting to think that that's not the approach that I want to take at all. And that is because I've kind of got a technique I did years ago, and I think it's very applicable here. Let's say, what's the best way of showing this? Let's make a cone. And this cone is going to be sort of the beam of light that the sphere wants to kind of get sucked into. we can make it a little more visually pleasing in the viewport by adding a render tag, display, use, lines. So now we get these lines to represent where the cone lives. So with that in mind, here's the thought. What if we put the baseball into a null and make a nice little dynamic rig here? Specifically, I want to control all the dynamics from this baseball using an old school forces wind. This wind is going to be blowing on the baseball, but we can control where this wind is aiming. So hopefully the basic version of this is really simple. In order to have something be very visible in the viewport, I shall make this sphere be our goal. Let's make it kind of tiny. That sphere will be our goal. So the wind will aim via a simple target tag. This will aim at the sphere. That's going to aim at the target. That means this wind is constantly aiming at that target. Now, depending on the other variables we feed in here, looks like I completely put that sphere in the wrong place. Make it a child of the cones, reset PSR. Okay, so if we hit play, the wind is not moving with the baseball, which is fine. We can make it move with the baseball by right-clicking, adding a rigging constraint tag, and I want it to take on the PSR of the baseball, but actually I don't want the R, I just want the position. So please follow the baseball wherever it goes. So hopefully now we can see that it's going to visually lag one frame behind, but it's still working correctly. You can now see that this is traveling with the baseball, but it will be constantly aiming at that sphere. So in this case, if we were to make this wind strong enough, and in order to counteract gravity, it's going to have to be at least 45. This should be constantly applying a power to it. And now you'll see that even if this overshoots, this wind is constantly trying to rotate it to aim back towards that center point. So let's see. Yeah, you see it's doing this big arc and gravity's trying to pull it down. This is actually a really fun rig. I've used it for a lot of different things. It's a really cool way of controlling dynamics. I'm going to increase my power here. And now you can see as it flies closer, it's actually turning the ball around and it's flying over here. And it's constantly trying to get back to this particular location. So the ball now has a goal, and that goal can change if we were to move this beam along. If I pull this over here, that becomes the new destination. It's going to chase it, giving it enough time. It's going to chase it wherever I move it. There it goes. It's doing a big arc right now. Now, obviously, this is currently super overshooting it. But if we bring that friction back again and we give it the proper motivation, specifically being this friction should slow it down overall. So gravity starts becoming less of a thing. But now you can see it's really slowing that down. Let's just pretend we're not worried about throwing the baseball right now. We just want to see this travel. Currently, the friction is draining all the energy out from the scene, but the wind is adding new forces back in again. And now you can see this baseball is traveling and it's attempting to get back to this location. And now it's going to just wander around this little center point. So that's actually working pretty nicely for us. Now, I'm thinking that that's all working quite well. We want that we could just keyframe up the wind at a particular point so it doesn't have to trigger right away. We could trigger it right at the moment that gets into the location. Technically, we could do this in slightly more dynamic ways with Espresso. Let's turn off the wind temporarily. Actually, that's indeed what we wanted to do. So let's say no friction, no wind. Let's let that arc fly. And let's see, right around there is actually where the peak was. And somehow I've moved this cone. Where did I move the ball? Why is everything not zeroed out? Okay, well, that's fine. I scooted it in space at some point, so my fault. Hit play. The baseball gets flung. It kind of hits this peak right there. So that is when we will activate this suddenly being something that's trying to do. Now, we could do that by, it could be active the whole time, and we could slowly keyframe up to this wind speed. So right now is when that wind speed should be at this power. We could rewind a couple of frames and say at this time, the power's at 0. So that's the only thing we're doing right now is the wind suddenly triggering at that point. Let's just see what that looks like. There's no friction. So it's completely gravity. And now immediately see this is taking over and trying to drift into that location. So now that that happened, we could go back to that same time. This is when it suddenly activates. And we could give it some sort of fall off, but I think we just keyframe the friction as well. And I don't want it to be too much. So let's just lower it down to 5. Strength of 5. Jump it back about 5 frames, and the friction will be at 0. So now we're just keyframing up the friction and the wind, so it's completely dynamic, and then suddenly those forces take over, and it's attempting to stay in that particular location. I should probably turn on the friction. Let's try that again. So the friction turned on. Suddenly friction kicks in, and it's trying to stay here. And no matter where we move this cone, it is going to travel to get to that location. Now, the speed in which it travels is going to be a function of how strong this wind is and how strong the friction is. So if instead of 111, we go back to that keyframe and jump this up to 1,111, and jump this back to approximately the correct location. When this gets flung up, then it's going to take over. Now you see very strongly it's following it. If I move this, it's going to very quickly get chased into that position. But keep in mind that the friction is also slowing it down. So if I turn off the friction, it's going to be a lot more responsive. So it's going to sort of buzz around there. Keep in mind, it is a fully dynamic object. It is going to be attempting to get there. We could give the friction, there's a lot of different settings we could do. The friction has this full power fall off. If I were to drop that inside the sphere and actually limit it, give it the spherical fall off and increase the size, we could probably invert the spherical field. If I say invert, then that means the friction is really strong outside of it. So if it starts escaping where it's supposed to be, then there's more friction. But when it's in the center, it's going to be kind of free to move around. We might actually want the opposite of that. I'm not sure. Let's just see what that does. Zoo, zoo. So now it's zipping around really quickly at the center point, but it's got a lot of power to it. And if the cone were to start escaping, then you see it's going to be very responsive to trying to get back into that location. Let's try inverting that just to see what it does. Spherical field, remapping, don't invert. So now try again. Pew! Doing, doing, boing, boing, boing. And now if I remove this, yeah, you see it's very responsive now. If it gets too far away, it's very quickly getting pulled back into the middle. So yeah, this is kind of a more dynamic method for that to want to get into a particular location. The more friction we slow that down with, you still have full dynamic control over everything, such as we could have this be a follow rotation. So it could actually be not spinning too much itself. And honestly, a decent amount of linear damping or drag could calm it down a lot. Doing the proper fall off here, you can stop this from having this kind of like accelerating looping shape. You want to have it find an equilibrium. That would take more time and a little bit more nuance than what we're doing right now to work. And I want to get into other questions, but hopefully that gives you a cool direction to explore a little bit. And I do like it kind of capturing it here. And the point being it's still dynamic and it's going to attempt to get in that spot. I think actually, now I think about it, the part we're missing is we want the wind to also get weaker as it gets near that center point. So just as a final bit, the wind can also have a fall off. I'll give it its own spherical field, which will live in the same place inside that other sphere. And as it gets closer, that's actually going to get stronger as it gets towards the middle, but we can invert that and say it gets weaker as it gets towards the middle. So that's going to be, if it's far away, it's going to very quickly try and get to the center point. But once it's in the center, you see it's way calmed down now. And the further away this gets, the more it's like, no, I really want to catch up to you. Woo, zoom. So yeah, there we go. Pretty fun. I like these kind of rigs. So thanks for the question. I'll save this one for anyone who gets these files on Patreon. Set this as to a, let's just say baseball catch. And check out some additional questions. Let's see what we've got. Magica, unfortunately, I've got nothing to contribute to that as far as configuring NVIDIA to work with Redshift. That's sadly just not something I'm an expert on. That'd actually be probably a pretty good question for Chad Ashley. I bet you he would know, but I sadly do not. Even though I do use Redshift, but I just used it out of the box and I didn't change anything about it. Let's see. Mr. Matt Dog, my thoughts on the Cinema 4D announcements. Well, first of all, I'll mention, because yesterday a bunch of people were like, wait, what announcements? And I think they did post the main announcement, but Maxon announced the Neutron, the kind of Project Neutron that they're working in. It's a big new application of the core, the new core that they've been talking about for a long time. And the new core specifically they've been talking about for a long time. What they're doing is essentially rebuilding a bunch of Cinema 4D from a foundational level out of nodes. Now, they were saying that the ultimate plan is that they're building everything out of nodes, and then they're going to use those nodes and rebuild Cinema 4D. So you can kind of imagine that you open up Cinema and that you have your cube, and the cube pretty much looks exactly like a cube always has, but you could go inside of the cube and see the pieces that built it, the actual, like, oh, these are the points getting generated, here's the mesh getting generated, here's how the polygons are being created, and here's the UV, kind of see how everything's broken down. Right now, it's just they did a quick tech demo, and I think that they said they're going to be doing more of a demo when it comes to IBC. They were talking about that live, so I look forward to seeing more of that. Now, I am familiar with some of the behind the scenes stuff, so I have to be careful about what I say and only talk about what they've talked about announcements wise. I think it's incredibly powerful. Everybody was in the live chat for C4D Live was kind of, coming up with these Cinema 4D / Houdini names like C4Dini and things like that. I think it's going to unlock a lot of potential as this moves forward and it gets implemented. The thought here is it's going to unlock all the potential you could possibly want to go deeper. But you want something that makes Cinema 4D special is that it's really easy for a very small team to make a lot of content very quickly. And if you don't have all of the tools that we do, and Cinema by default, all the amazing MoGraph tools and being able to build things quickly, then I think the magic of Cinema 4D goes away. The way their plan is to make it so that at any given point you can go deeper and you can build your own rigs. And you just imagine, like, I'm completely making this up as I go, but imagine if they go in, like I said, they build a cube and you could go inside the cube and see how it was built. You could go and make your own super cube that has extra settings and the things that you specifically wanted to do. And who knows, but it's like, maybe you could go deeper into any given field object or into a cloner and be like, oh, here's a new cloner mode that is very specific to something that I do all the time. I'm going to make that. I could even envision some sort of, people could distribute in a good way of like, oh, here's the super cloner, or here's this upgraded version of something. So that could be incredibly powerful. So it's something I think it's something to super duper look forward to. And I look forward to seeing how it gets fully implemented. And that's Tangle. Yeah, they did the same thing with the node-based system. The problem with a node-based material system is that it effectively only works with ProRender. And I don't use ProRender at all. I think most people have already moved on to third-party renderers. So that system working in a very limited capacity, well, I mean, not in a limited capacity, it's working in a very big capacity, but for a very specific renderer. I know they've now opened it up so that the third-party renderers could be implemented into those, but now that same node system is getting kind of fully integrated. And once that is ubiquitous in Cinema, I think it's going to become like a no-brainer. Like, it's super espresso. So, I mean, it couldn't be more up my alley for sure. So, let's see. I think we got some questions coming in. Sticky. This might be the same question we got last week. I'm not sure. Let's see what it is. Oh, it's a little different, but I think it might end up being similar. So first of all, this was made by Justin Bates. And it's X Particles Organic Creature. So it is in Cinema. Oh, that's cool. Bleep, 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 bleep. That's cool. I don't know this for sure. It's really cool from Justin Bates here. Last week, I couldn't think of any way that we could even come close to approaching something like this. And well, here's the difference between what we saw last week and what we're seeing here. These limbs are instantly appearing in that spot. So if they are instantly appearing in those spots, then I have a thought how it might be done. And that is, and I'm going to see if we can do this. Can we do this straight up, or do they have to be X particles? Specifically in X particles, they have the pretty great XP trail. And the XP trail has a lot of way. Yeah, it does seem to be, it has to be locked on. It does say object trail, vertices. Does it have all the objects? It's on the vertices. Let's see. So let's see. The shape did as well last time. Make this editable and feed that in. No, it doesn't give you all. Yeah, that's a trail. So it has to strictly be X particles. So that makes this a little more specific. However, let me think. I guess we'll need to make an emitter. I would like to make this a. Let's try making it a sphere and tell it to generate on the surface only. We could also do a defined emission. Can we do a. Yeah, we can do a spherical defined emission, right? No, a sphere. Oh, yeah, that's not defined. Defined emission. Here's the shape. Mode circular. Yeah, it's a circle. It's not going to be on a surface. We could put it onto an object, but let's just start out with a circle. I think this will work fine. Increase the count. So this is going to be where the particles are generated. And I think we could say radial on frame. I mean, that's where they get generated from. I want them to be stuck there. Forgive me, I do not use. What does static mode do? Well, I just don't want them to move. I think we can ignore this just by saying a speed of 0. So essentially that should generate a particle. I don't know if it's a single particle. Let's, yeah, you're going to see this. I'm going to be a little clunky on this because I'm just not as familiar in the world of X particles right now. I just want a wind, or let's do a turbulence. I just want to see if these are, yeah, okay. It seems like there's only one particle per, which is what I wanted. So there's one particle per. And when it comes to the trail, you see those are getting traced. However, if we don't do the turbulence and in the trail, we might have to hit play for this to work. But you see that there's an algorithm. It's what types of connections you have. And we could say connect. I think it might be cluster. Now, we very intentionally, okay, that's connecting everything to everything. But if we set a cluster distance and we start lowering that, oh, that's interesting. Maybe it's not a cluster. Tendrils, constraints. I mean, all points to all points is sort of what I want. And it's a cool pattern. However, nearest by index, I would think it'd be cluster. What I want them to do is only be able to connect to the ones nearest to it. And that doesn't seem to do what I want. You could say nearest by distance, but that's only going to be the one. I want multiple connections, not just to be the nearest. Oh, all within distance. All right, there we go. All within distance. And now as I increase this, yeah, now they're starting to interconnect a little bit. So that is excellent. Now the thought here is we would actually need these to be far enough away so that they're not interconnecting, but let's just ignore that for now. And we also need one more particle inside of this emitter. And that's going to be a somewhat tricky part to me because the thought would be as these are moving around, as they get near each other, in this, imagine one in the center. I'm not currently set up to do this very well. The thought would be, imagine there's a particle in the middle and it's just kind of drifting around. And as it suddenly gets near to one of these, it's like, oh, connect over there, connect over there, connect over there. That's the thought. I don't think I have a very good setup here to actually demonstrate that properly, because I'd want these to be static, but the middle one to be moving around. So I'd have to create an entire system where one's seeing groups and the other one, they're in individual groups and the turbulence is being affected on one and it's trapped inside of a shape. And even we're just on the circular thing. I'd prefer we're on a box. We'd have to clone onto individual boxes. There's a lot of different things I would have to set up to do it. And honestly, we just don't have the time to do it. So it could be a good question to hit me up again in the future. But sadly, I am not going to wrap that one up here. But thank you for the question. Dean, yeah, nulls and a tracer, but those would all be there. There's no distance. The key here is a distance setting. If you want it to be automatic, You couldn't put nulls in a tracer because you have to manually keyframe those nulls out, or they'd need something to attract them to a different surface. And that's sort of the problem there. I wonder, with the idea of nulls in a tracer, that actually could give you some growth. Let's spend a couple minutes on here because this will be more in the world of dynamics, which I'm obviously more familiar with. If we were to trap everything, a bunch of stuff inside of this sphere, let's set it to a very specific 200 radius. Render tag, display, use the lines so we can see the interior. If we did make, let's say I make a sphere inside of it, and we'd have to, each sphere would have to be a copy, but I think we can do it pretty quickly. This will be the main, this will be the cage, and if we were to make a second sphere and make it dynamic and interconnect them via a tracer, so let's see what we can do here. Tracer, this tracer is going to be fed our tentacle sphere. So that is being fed both of these objects, telling them to connect elements. It's going to, actually we want to say connect all objects, and this should interconnect them, and don't do the tracing of the vertices. So now I think there's just a line from one to the other. So now there's just a line connecting them. Making the cage a collider body that is a static mesh. That means I could travel inside of it. This one, the main, I will also make it a collider body, which could be an ellipsoid. And this tentacle sphere, that one will be a rigid body. So hopefully what this means is when I play, this line is going to continue to interconnect these two, turning off gravity, Control D, under dynamics, saying no gravity in the scene. This should now just float in space. So adding in something like a force. Oh yeah, this is an idea that you could go crazy with the field forces. I would like to see a two-dimensional cut slice of this. So setting this to 222 should give us enough range to see the entire thing with a thickness of 0. Oh wait, we got to double that, 444 to capture the entire sphere. So now feeding in any forces, specifically, let's start by feeding in, I guess we could do a spherical field, but just to show you that this could be any mesh, it will technically calculate slower. In the object, let's drag in the cage. The cage will come in as points, but if we say, I want this actually to be as a surface, it's now seeing the surface of the sphere as something for it to calculate. As I increase that radius, you can now see that we have all these angles aiming in. Now, they are going to be a little bit janky because they're based on these not very subdivided polygons. So they're very straight, and not transitioning between them. Having done that, though, I'm going to push it in a little bit too far, but it should be enough for it to get to that sphere. And currently you see it's pushing away from the surface. So that's something to keep in mind. I actually want this one to do the opposite. So this should attract it to the surface. So now you can see it actually stretches all the way over there, and that's going to be attracted all the way to this outer wall now. Now, I don't actually want that to go that far over. So the radius of the cage should not be that crazy. So something like that. So that should pretty powerfully attract it to the edge of the wall. We can crank up the power here to, I don't know, 40. And now they'd be really stuck to the wall if they get pulled over to that wall. But right now, nothing's affecting it in the center. And keep in mind, we're just seeing a cross section of this, but it's really everywhere on the sphere. Now, adding on top of that a random field that will be additive. So it's adding on top of that effect. And it doesn't have to be that strong. I do want it to be larger, though. So let's say 1,000 and give it some speed. So it's constantly moving around. And it doesn't have to be clamped. We're keeping this reasonable. So now you can see that this is randomly getting pulled around. But now I think when it gets near that edge, it's going to be really stuck and attracted to that edge. Now you could imagine that we could make some sort of alternating thing on the surface here where it's occasionally like flinging things away. And maybe this inner one could be re-attracting it to the center. But you can imagine how these would become these almost intelligent tentacles with just this line interconnecting them. And that actually gives us the growth effect as well. And now that we've got this very basic version of it built, if I were to group these, put that null at 0. Here's kind of the quick and dirty way of doing it. Just making this this arm null, copying it, putting another one, copy both of them, paste it, make some more, let's just grab these outer ones, which should be that one and that one. So this one and this one, and spin it vertically, very roughly doing that. Now, each of them should be randomly affected, but they each have their own tracer instantly connecting them in a very easy way. So now they will get randomly pulled around. They are dynamic, so they'll bounce off each other, if not their individual arms. And now you get these traced wanting to get to the surface. You can imagine adding in additional forces on this wall that would perhaps kick them away. I'm running out of time quickly here. Let's see if I can do a basic version of them getting kicked away from the wall. Here's the thought. I'll make a folder. Doesn't need the random field. In this folder, I will feed a copy of this cage, holding down Control to make the copy of it. There's a second version of this cage. It's got the same radius, which is cool. I want it to be stronger, though. This will be 3 times stronger. So a scale, actually, I'm going to make it blatant, like 500. It's 500%, way stronger. However, I'm going to invert the direction. So this was actually pushing away. It's going to push away from the wall. But that's going to immediately push everything away. I think we'll immediately see all these get flung away quite quickly. Those get flung away. I want it only to occasionally get pushed away. I don't think we actually needed this folder, to tell you the truth. Go away folder. So this cage, can we individually? Yeah, I think we can. So this will be cage push, and this one could be cage pull. In this cage push, it could be fed a mask, and that mask could be anything we want. In this case, another random field. Yes, be a mask, normal power. This will be additive on top of everything else. And this random field is going to be a little bit difficult to visualize, but we can see we can kind of see the scale of 500 right here. So we just have to kind of use our imagination here on the way randoms are applied. But right now it's applying its power somewhere from 0 to 100% on the cage. So it's only occasionally pushing away. But unfortunately, it's so strong that's going to be very powerfully pushing away. So the thought here is remapping that random. So putting in a curve above this so that the random is remapped. There we go. Actually, you can visualize that pretty well. You can see as I pull this back, those are becoming very small and weak. So now you can see that that force is only happening in very isolated kind of explosive areas. And that is the thought here. I can also pull this in so those become like really full strength. So now on these areas, there's suddenly a really strong no, get away from me kind of push. This random field should also be animated. I'll do a slightly different, I guess we can just do the same speed, but a different seed. I think I just accidentally typed in the same seed. I tried randomly typing and I just typed in 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that should be randomly moving around. So in general, these will just get drifted around in space. Actually, now I think about it, maybe we could just tell this cage to have a really big fall off. So they will randomly move around. Oops, not that radius. As this increases, I'm going to have it so that it actually pulls all the way to the center point. So these will constantly be attracted out to the nearest wall that they're near. Always. And there's this randomness drifting them around. But occasionally they're going to get punched by a really strong randomness. That's the thought anyway. So let's visually hide the field and see what kind of behavior we're getting. And keep in mind, everything we just built is very three-dimensional. Oh, that was pretty good. Yeah, okay, that's actually working. For how quickly we put this together, this is working great. You see they're getting attracted to the nearest wall and then occasionally getting punched away. And the ratio we end up with there completely randomly is working almost perfectly. So that's actually pretty great. Now, this is just using these directly being connected via a tracer. So each of those just has one tracer. It's the simplest possible setup. Personally, I'd like to make an entire tentacle arm here. So like dynamically interlinking things or doing a series of spline, like a spline that's got a spring that's connecting it to a spot. And then these could be proper dynamic tentacles. But right now they're just dynamic kind of endpoints. But, you know, keep in mind that you could build the rig slightly differently. So with this doing its thing, very, very well. I shall save it. Tentacles fields. Let's throw this into a volume. It's going to run relatively slow, but let's just see what we end up with because that's kind of a key part of this look. Volume builder into a volume mesher. we have to grab all of the tracers. So search for the word TR, grab the tracers, desearch. I could drag them out as a child. What I should have done is lock that, and now I can search for TR, grab these, and then drag all the tracers in directly. And now those all get dragged in. Unfortunately, actually, here's the thing. You can see that if I select them, I cannot make changes to all of them at the same time, which is unfortunate. I wish we could select more than one object. You can't. But the way that these rigs are built, you know what? I am going to take all of the tracers. So searching TR, grabbing all of those. I could drag these all out into their own just floating point, and that's fine. And if I were to make a connect object and make these all children of the connect, then that becomes a single spline merging them all. And if that is what we feed in to, I'm going to unlock it because I know I'm going to forget. If we drag this connect in, it now is brought in as a single spline. And now we have very clean control over that. So we can set the radius, drag the voxel size down, and let's see. Yeah, we can drag this down on the endpoint, and there's this really great checkbox, which is so important. We can turn on scale segment, and now you can see that these individually can be rescaled. And actually, we could even put these in to be these kind of blobs like that, and also bring in the spheres as endpoints. Let's even search for, those are tentacle spheres. Those could be an increased radius. Why not? And those will just be brought in as geometry. So lock, search for tentacle, grab. Oh, I thought I locked it. I think I clicked search. Go away. Sorry, let me do it again. Volume, builder, lock, search for the tentacle spheres. Drag that in as an additional object, and now they're all getting unioned in. We'd have to make them, because they're not children, we have to make them invisible in the viewport. But I can see those have these blobby, they're blobbing in. I'll save again as a B, and let's see how quickly this runs. Slower, but you can see that we now have these tentacle blobs all traveling around doing their thing, and there's some life to them, and they are snapping to those walls. We could crank up the power of, I wonder how much we could just do that. What if we currently set a voxel, or that's, hang on, I'm locked. Field force is currently set to 40, but if we say like 400, then this should be like really quick. Like these should get, they'll get punched away and very quickly be reattracted to the wall again. Pop, 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 pop. Actually, it's like a sea anemone when something gets too near and it pulls in the tentacle. And you can see that these are automatically doing their thing. There's a lot we could do as far as displacements and noises and adding variation on various parts, even with this very kind of clean and simple setup. One thought that jumps to mind is a displacer. It's not going to work great because of the nature of these children. Let's just see what happens. If I put in a displacer, feed it a noise, and really crank this up, then those are going to start getting, actually, they only have 2 points. So these tracers need to be subdivided, having a uniform 8 subdivision. Now you can see that we get this noise where they're all traveling around. Now that might be really jittery and ugly as they move around, but actually it's looking better than I thought it would. This noise is really small, so that noise getting larger will make those transitions smoother. Yeah, so those are more smoothly going. And they're not staying on the tips very well because you can be randomly displaced away from the tip. However, the displacer can get a fall off. Now, this is not a good idea as a way to do this, but if we were to lock that and search for the spheres, I could just drag those spheres in, and those are fall offs to, and they're being brought in as points. So if we select all of them, and we can't select more than one, I can invert those, and now the tip is going to be what's not affected, and I have to increase the radius. There we go. You can see as I increase this that the tip is getting erased out. Now, do I have to add these together? Can I do all of them at the same time? Aha, I can't add. It's a little bit weird that only one of them seems to be doing the effect. I did change all of them, right? Yeah. I'm not sure why only one of them is doing it, but I didn't think the displacement would work at all, and the fact that it's working as well as it is kind of cool. So yeah, now we got this weird kind of blobby tentacle monster. We could also like hide those spheres and trace or not trace, clone a sphere onto the tip of them is another way we could do it. But now, yeah, now we get this tentacle monster, and it's even got this variation. We could throw any kind of displacement or noise onto them individually, but yeah, that's displacing the lines, and it's definitely getting a lot of life very quickly in a way that I didn't think we'd get away with. So I think we might have time for one more quick. I wanted to stop quickly. We'll see if there's a very, very, very quick question. Thurl or Theral, I'm not sure how to pronounce, but yeah, there's a Cineversity plugin called Cantenary for tentacle splines. I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, that could be good. Pro Tools, that's actually an excellent reminder. There is a Rocket Lasso Slack channel, so if you like helping out people and having a community of people to help out and ask and answer questions, then you can head over to rocketlassoslack.com and join there, where it's kind of the same people who are hanging out right now, but they're there helping each other, asking questions, answering questions. There's challenges and sketches and stuff that happen at various times. It's really cool. And that's where I do a lot of announcements from. I end up picking a lot of beta testers for an upcoming plugin from there. So it's just a good place to go and hang out. So yeah, rocketlassoslack.com. Beep. Alrighty. A little question. Chenda, how would you texture different regions of a displacement? I think I understand the question. How would I texture different areas of essentially depth? It depends how you're doing your displacement. There's actually multiple ways of thinking of this. We'll do the very simple version. I'll create a sphere and unlock this. Always very important to unlock, otherwise it's going to be confusing. Give us a bunch of subdivisions, 64 subdivisions. You see, it's decent. We can even go 124. So 124, thank you. Very subdivided. Now that we've done this, anything that we apply as a displacement, that same channel could be fed into something else as a mask effectively. So the very, very simplest version here is creating a material. This material could have a displacement. And actually, yeah, let's do it this way. So we can create a displacement. I'll just feed in a nice noise, crank it up to something like 500, add a little contrast. And yeah, that's already applied. So if I hit it has to be made. Actually, it doesn't have to be editable, but we do have to turn off render perfect. Yeah, turn off render perfect. You see that's getting displaced. This can be displaced even more. Let's say 25. And you know what? Let's grab a different noise. I've been using regular Perlin noise too much. I am a big fan of Naki. So yeah, that one's working pretty well. More subdivisions would look better, obviously. And you know what? There's not much going on in the scene, so I'll double the count. So we get this shape. That same noise that's causing the displacement could be the same thing that we're using to feed into something like the luminance channel. So dragging that same image, you can do that. You can just click the image and drag it into the luminance and drop it on there. That can become a mask on the same thing. You'll see if I render that these outer points are very light and the inner parts are very dark. Having done that, we could invert the clipping or even start pulling this in. And now you can see I'm really masking these areas out. Turn off the color channel for a moment. And now when I render, you see that the valleys are the ones that are textured. That's become a mask for us. If I were to crank this up, you can now see that those are fully glowing because everything below that point, because it's using the same map, that same thing will be creating that displacement. Now, that's one method, pretty straightforward. Let me show you a completely unrelated method. And you were talking about two displacements, so you might be familiar with that one already. And I don't know how well this will work, but we'll see. Delete that material, make this sphere editable, and here's going to be something very important. We will be using displacers this time, which automatically make things a little bit more challenging. And let's just create the noise right away. I should have copied the noise, but we'll make a new one. 300. We'll do a weird one that we don't usually use. It'll need to be real big though. Yeah, that's a funky one. So we can do something like that, and we get this pretty interesting looking displacement happening right away. So we even push it further. We instantly get like an alien looking planet, very stylized. So that's what we get there. Turning this off in the sphere, I'm going to create a rigging tension tag. In this tension tag, we can create a fold map and a stretch map. So here I'll create the map. So it's going to make a new vertex map for me, call it stretch. And we need to lock this in. So I want to see this tag. I need to see the tension. So I'll pop this out. And now we can click on the tag and actually see it. And actually turn on our displacer. And we need to fix the tension. So turn off the displacer, fix the tension. So it's like, okay, that's where I'm at. This is what I look like. Then we can start adding displacement in. And as the displacement comes in, these are areas that are getting stretched. We can set the sensitivity here via the amount. The more I pull it up, the more we'll get a nice transition from one to the other. But the less we do, then the more it's like, well, I stretched a little bit, like time to blow out and become very, very sharp. Now that we have this is a vertex map that we could do anything we want with. And keep in mind that this is now valid to put more than one displacer in. Putting a second displacer with a second noise. I'll do a Naki and make it a little smaller. So now you can see that there's two different noises. They're going to be, it's a lot more complex of a setup there, the way that they're all interacting. But the stretch map is grabbing every place that's stretched. You could also have done a fold map or anything that pinches in. There's going to be less pinching than stretching. But now that that's happening, first of all, keep in mind that you could make a second vertex map. And on this one, turn on fields. And in the fields, drag in our first vertex map. And now we're just seeing this one in that one. And changing this to something like average, we can, oh, dang it, there's still the bug. There's a bug in Cinema right now that you can't have more than one vertex map on a single object. So let's just not worry about that. I was going to show you a way of blurring it, but this Cinema's got a bug right now. So let's just keep it limited to this. We've got this vertex map, and we can change this and create the blur. We can't do very good masking from it, but based on that, we could make a material. We'll just use the same one. And in the luminance channel, feed it a vertex map under effects, vertex map. And inside the vertex map, drag that one. That becomes it's just a black and white mask. But if we were to render, if we were to apply the material, turn off displacement, and then hit render, now you can see that the areas that got stretched are the ones that are getting illuminated. And that, of course, could become a mask for different noise types, different glows, have certain things on one spot and not on another. So yeah, stretch map, completely unrelated method that actually does a really good job of maintaining the different details as this thing stretches. It's really cool. That is going to have to wrap up today's episode. If you like this kind of content, it is... if you like this content and you would like, I lost my window. Here it is. If you like this content and you would like to support it, I do have a Patreon set up, which I mentioned earlier. So here is Patreon. You can join. And like I said, you can get access to the tutorials posted early. There's actually 2 bonus live streams I do on Tuesdays and Thursdays where we try and figure out tutorials and get things recorded. And I also have 295 posts. So there's a lot of posts that you can go and catch up on. So it's appreciated, but you already see that everything I'm creating, like the tutorials and everything, are coming out here for everybody. So it's appreciated, but not necessary. So I just want to say thanks again, everybody, for coming and hanging out. Make sure you join the Slack channel at rocketlassoslack.com. And otherwise, that will wrap this one up. Thank you so much for hanging out and asking questions, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.